I supported my wife wholeheartedly through her law degree, yet she spent a weekend getaway with her lover, leaving me with nothing but a cold pat on the head. Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Growing up, I valued stability and routine. My parents, though not wealthy, created a nurturing environment focused on hard work and loyalty. They were high school sweethearts who married young, serving as a model of consistency and love. I hope to have a similar bond with my future spouse, built on mutual respect and commitment. In college, I met Emily and was immediately drawn to her. She was ambitious, intelligent and vibrant. We fell in love quickly. I had just graduated with a degree in it and secured a job, while Emily continued her education, eventually earning her law degree. Our relationship felt predestined and I supported her through law school, believing in our future together. Recently, my wife of 24 years, Emily, left for a weekend getaway with her lover Luke Carter, without any reassurance or affection, just a cold pat on the head. Her indifference was chilling and I was overwhelmed by uncertainty about what to do next. We married at 22 and I had just started my job while Emily pursued her law degree. I supported her through those tough years because I loved her and believed it would benefit us both. She graduated, got a prestigious job and built a successful career, though she earned more. I was proud of her accomplishments. We postponed having kids to focus on her career and eventually she decided against having any. We became a dual income, no kids couple. I didn't even know what birth control she used and deep down I resented her decision about children but tried to enjoy life. Emily was always the dominant partner and I didn't mind putting her needs first. However, her attitude recently changed and her increased libido benefited me until last night she casually informed me about her date with Luke Carter, with no guilt, saying she needed new experiences but still wanted to have fun with me. I knew arguing was pointless and a cold emptiness filled me. I didn't kiss her goodnight or say goodbye the next morning, feeling she was already dead to me at work. I was a zombie, dreading what Emily planned for that night. I knew I couldn't endure the humiliation of her plans and feared the consequences of divorce. Feeling trapped, I thought there was only one solution: someone had to die. When I got home that evening, Emily was getting ready for her weekend date while she showered and dressed. I took a weapon from my briefcase and loaded it. My plan was to shoot Luke. When he arrived, I knew I'd end up in jail, but I didn't care. However, Luke just honked from his Maserati without coming to the door. Emily patted my head like a dog as she left, not noticing the loaded weapon under the couch pillow. I growled as she walked out with her overnight bag. Despite my anger, I couldn't shoot her, and running out to shoot at the car felt absurd. After they left, I reflected on our life together, looking through old photos of happy times in Cancun, Paris and our Caribbean cruise. None of it mattered anymore. I had no support system. My family was gone and Emily had no interest in my life. I made some changes to our joint bank account, sent an email to her law firm about her affair and left a note with my wedding ring on the coffee table. I sat on the couch reminiscing about better times and eventually found the courage to pick up the weapon. "I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I hope to see you soon," I mumbled before pulling the trigger. I was lying in bed with Luke's in and hadn't thought about Terry since I left home on Friday. I wasn't pleased that Luke brought him up, but he was right. Turo's days of sleeping all night were long gone. Terry had always been warm and loving, but sometimes a girl needs more excitement. I honestly didn't think about him at all this weekend. I said, "You put him out of your mind. Don't forget. He's a few years older, so it's expected. Didn't you think about what we discussed earlier?" I asked. "You mean doing it in front of your husband?" I asked, raising an eyebrow skeptically. "Yes," I replied, "just to remind him how things will work from now on. Don't worry, Terry's a coward. He won't do anything. He didn't even try to stop me when I left Friday night." Well, kitties can turn into mountain lions when pushed too hard. Remember the Connors case? RY warned. You said he didn't try to stop you. Did he do or say anything? Luke continued. No, he just sat on the couch. He hasn't said anything since I told him Thursday night, I answered. Did he call or text you? Luke asked incredulously. No, he hasn't. I replied. You don't find that strange? I asked. Not really, he knows how I act. When I've made a decision. I said either that or Hune's already dumped you. Luke replied sharply. He wouldn't dare. He knows I love him and it's just sex. I retorted. RY looked at me as if to say what's wrong with you, but then softened. If you say so, let'n go again. Fred, not until you promise to help me punish him when we get back tomorrow night. I said okay, I'll help. Luke agreed. We pulled into my driveway late Sunday night. The house was eerily quiet and the yard hadn't been mowed, something Terry always did on Saturdays. I mentally noted to talk to him. I expected that with my new interest. Nothing else would change. Are you ready for this? RY asked. Of course, I replied. Say it. Luke instructed. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Luke following closely as I turned the key. I thought at least Terry Hayson changed the locks. I opened the door and was hit by a horrible smell. What the hell is that? I exclaimed, covering my mouth and peering inside. What I saw horrified me. I quickly closed the door and ran into the yard where I threw up. What's going on? Are you okay? RY asked, approaching me. It's Terry. I stammered. He's dead. What dead? RY almost shouted. Are you sure? I'm sure the couch is ruined and there's mess everywhere. What am I supposed to do? I said, panic rising in my voice. Well, call emergency. Luke replied nervously. Thanks, Captain Hindsight, I snapped sarcastically. RY recoiled but quickly regained his composure. I'm sorry, RY. I didn't expect this. Would you stay until the cops come? I asked. I can stay for a few minutes. Luke said reluctantly, but this is your mess to clean up. Thanks. I said. I dialed emergency. The operator assured me the police were on their way and suggested I stay outside. I agreed. Given the stench, we waited and Ray Maserati and it hit me. Terry was dead. I didn't want this. I wanted him to take care of me in old age. Realizing that, I burst into tears. RY put his arm around me. You know you'll have to call Bled. So RY said it'll be in the paper and the firm doesn't like surprises. I know, I said quietly. Jonathan Bledo was the managing partner of our firm. You should call him now before the police arrive. RY suggested. You're right. I said, pulling myself together as a lawyer. I needed to act. I called Bledo home number. He answered after the third ring. Good evening. Emily Bledo said. What can I do for you, Mr. Bledo? My husband is dead. It seems he eliminated himself. I told him, my voice trembling. Well, that explains why he never responded to my email. Green replied in his usual deliberate tone, an email. I asked, puzzled why my boss would write to Terry. Yes, he sent a disturbing email on Friday night. I saw it after dinner at the country club and replied right away. Is it true? Green inquired. What is true? Sir. I asked, now worried that you spent the weekend with Luke Carter and were physically engaged. Is that true? He repeated in his relentless tone. Yes, sir, it's true. I said, fearing for my job. The firm's morals clause could get me fired. Lying would only make it worse. I'm sorry to hear that, Emily, and about your husband. Have you called the police? Yet, Bledo asked. Yes, sir, I confirmed you'd be busy for a few days. Take a week's vacation to handle your husband's passing. We'll discuss you and your future here when you return. Green said, but I have the Jonathan case. I protested. Jenny Hawkins is your second assistant, correct? He asked, knowing well he had appointed her. Yes, sir, I said, feeling numb. Jenny is competent. I'll have her file a continuance to get up to speed. Focus on your husband's arrangements. I'm very disappointed in you. Emily Bleedo said. I understand, sir, I said nervously. Is Mr. Carter with you now? Bled. So's tone was emotionless. Yes, sir, I replied. Inform him to report to my office first thing in the morning. Green ordered sternly. Yes, sir, I'll tell him. I said thank you. I'm sorry for your loss, Emily, we'll talk later. Goodbye. Green said, ending the call. I was stunned. It felt like he dealt with calls like this daily. I shook myself and looked at Luke grimly. Well, RY asked awkwardly. Green wants to see you in the morning. Apparently Terry sent him a letter about us. I said, feeling powerless. Crap. Luke sighed. We're totally screwed. I finished his thought. Maybe or maybe not. We have seniority and it's the first time. Maybe they'll be lenient. I suggested. You don't really believe that, do you? RY asked. Not really, but I hope. I'm so sorry. Emily RY said. Me too. RY. I'm as much to blame. I had no idea Terry would react like this. I said. At that moment 2 police cars and a coroner van arrived. An officer asked RY to move his car and another officer asked me for identification. I showed my license and they entered the house. As they opened the door, the smell hit them and the coroner's team began their work. Can you tell me what happened, Mrs. Baker? The officer asked. I left the house Friday afternoon. Terry was alive on the couch. I came back shortly before calling emergency. I explained. Terry is your husband, the sufferer? The officer asked. Yes, I said, and you were gone all weekend? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, I answered, and what did you do this weekend? He asked neutrally. I was with a coworker. I answered evasively, feeling my stomach twist. Is this the gentleman you were with? The officer asked. Yes, I confirmed, trying to stay detached but failing. I'd been in many interrogations, but this was different. He continued with a few more questions, which I answered briefly. After another 20 minutes, the officer finished taking my statement. I tried to stay nonchalant, but he was focused and my face reneged. As I explained my weekend, I had to admit I spent Friday night at an exclusive nightclub and the rest of the weekend at a prestigious apartment complex, even giving my apartment number. What was I supposed to do? Take the fifth demand, a lawyer? He was just taking witness statements at a possible crime scene. I was just a bystander, even if involved. That's all for now, Mrs. Baker. He said. I need to speak to your colleague. The officer walked off to talk to RY, passing where I had thrown up. He noted it and continued. It was evening and curious neighbors were watching from their windows and porches. Damn it. Did this have to be so public? Maybe I should have stayed with RY longer and come back after dark. A few minutes later, technicians came out with Terry's body on a gurney. I shuddered but couldn't look away. They put the gurney in the van, folded their suits into a bag and drove off. An officer with sergeant stripes approached me carrying 2 plastic bags. Mrs. Baker, he said. I'm Sergeant Smith. We found this weapon next to your husband. Did you know he had it? He asked, showing Terry's weapon. Yes, it was a gift from his grandfather. Hunes had it for years. I replied, shivering. I wondered if Terry had gotten the weapon after I left or had it all along. Had he planned to use it on RY or me before turning it on himself? The news stories of elimination self-destructions I had ignored now felt real. Terry loved me, didn't he? We found this on the coffee table. The sergeant said, holding out a bag with a note and Terry's wedding ring trembling. I read the note through the plastic. It was a furious letter blaming me for his passway in our ruined marriage, filled with words he had never used before. With shaking hands, I returned the note to the sergeant. My knees were shaking, but I didn't buckle if I wasn't in shock before I was. Now I realized that if Terry had spoken up on Thursday, maybe he would still be alive, but I couldn't dwell on. Maybe as a lawyer, I had to deal with the reality in front of me, taking deep breaths to steady myself. I asked the sergeant, can I go back to my house now? We're still examining the scene. It's pretty bad in there. Your husband committed self-destruction Friday night, and I don't think you should stay here for a couple of days. I called a cleaning service, but I'd recommend finding a hotel until Tuesday or Wednesday. Can I at least get my computer and some things for a couple of days? I asked professionally when we're done, said the sergeant. It could take another hour. He studied me for a moment, then handed me a card. I know this is a shock. I recommend Gina Hastings, an excellent counselor we referred to for trauma. Tell her you spoke to me. Check, get you in quickly. Thank you, Sergeant Smith. I replied, feeling annoyed at needing a counselor. I'll think about it. His expression showed disapproval and concern. Call her soon or talk to a pastor or friend, he said, then went back inside. I sighed and sat on the porch swing Terry had installed last summer. We had only used it once since then. I couldn't stop thinking about Terry's letter. Luke joined me on the bench, keeping a distance. I noticed some neighbors still watching from their windows. They wanted to know how we spent the weekend. Luke said with a sigh. You told them everything? I asked, stunned, almost just the basics. Luke replied, what did the sergeant want? I inquired. Terry wrote a self-destruction note. I said, blankly, blaming you. I asked sarcastically. He called me a witch and said his blood was on my hands. I replied, you can't blame yourself, HEK, the one who pulled the trigger. Luke said firmly, you're right. I almost whispered, but I have to face the consequences of my decisions. Luke continued. I think I know how to address Bleedo. Since I'm divorced and you're widowed. There's no risk of lawsuits. Our date was personal and not a scandal. The firm has no reason to fire us. I'll call you tomorrow after the meeting to coordinate. I looked at him, realizing too late how much Terry had done for me. RY was focused on saving his career while I was trying to save my sanity. Let me know what Bleedo says. I finally said I will. Are you going to be okay? Luke asked. I'll be fine. I replied, though I doubted it. Call me if you need anything, RY said before walking away. Yeah, okay, I mumbled. Shortly after an unmarked van arrived, a young man with shoulder-length blonde hair approached. Is this the Baker house? He asked. Yes, I confirmed, and you are Jack Harrison from Harrison Cleaning Services. I've been told there's been an incident. He replied, handing me a card. Yes, the police are still inside. Great, thanks. He put on his mask, boots and gloves, then went inside. A few minutes later, Jack and the police officers came out. Sergeant Smith walked over to me. We're done, Mrs. Baker. Here's my card with the case number. I'll have a report ready in a day or two. Call me if you have questions. Sergeant Smith said, thank you, can I get my things now? I asked, of course, but put on a mask and booties before going inside. The sergeant said Jack offered me some to use, thank you. I said, taking the card and putting it in my purse. Jack handed me boots and a fresh mask. The officers left as I put on the mask and boots. Jack opened a jar of mentholatum. Put this on your nose. It's still pretty bad in there, he advised. I followed his instructions and entered the house. The ointment helped, but the foul odor persisted. I inspected the mess on the expensive sectional sofa and realized I would need to replace it. Cost over $6,000 and wasn't even 8 months old. The abstract painting above it, which cost $2,000, was ruined, splattered with Terry's blood and brain matter. The carpet in front of the couch was soaked with blood and fluids. I can clean the carpet and hopefully salvage the subfloor. Not sure about the couch, but I'll try. Jack assured me, please do, I said quietly. How long will you be here? Most of the night. Can I call or leave a message when I leave? Yes, I said, handing him my card. Just lock up when you leave. I felt uneasy leaving him alone, but he was licensed and insured, so I took the risk. Yes, he replied, pocketing the card. I went upstairs, packed for 3 days, grabbed my laptop bag and quickly left the house before my stomach rebelled again. Jack was already hard at work. I told him I was leaving and he waved as I walked out. I checked into the Holiday Inn Express nearby, hoping for a room. Luckily one was available. I handed the clerk my ATM card, but it was declined. What, I asked, shocked. We always had enough in our joint account for 6 months' worth of bills. I used my credit card instead and went to my room determined to find out why the ATM card failed logging into our joint account. I saw a low balance warning. To my horror, there was only 24 left. Terry had donated almost everything to children's charities and a local orphanage. This was likely his way of showing his displeasure about my decision not to have children. My immediate concern was covering our bills, which were paid automatically. I transferred enough from my account to cover this month's expenses, wondering if Terry had done something similar with his account. I noted to visit the bank tomorrow. Exhausted and hungry, I ate a greasy hamburger that didn't sit well with my queasy stomach back in my room. I showered and got ready for bed, falling asleep immediately. In my dream, I heard a male voice say, "I see you finally decided to get your Lyris rear back in the house." It sounded like Terry, but sharper and angrier. "Terry, is that you?" I asked, seeing nothing but dark fog. "Can you come out so I can see you, please?" "Sure," the voice replied. A shadowy figure emerged, horrifying me, as I saw half of his head missing, bone shards falling away. I realized it was a nightmare. "No, this isn't real. You're not real. You're just a piece of that nasty hamburger I ate," I declared, trying to muster courage. His eyes flashed red and he came toward me. The smell hit me first. Then his blazing eyes blinded me. A primal scream made me jump back and fall to my knee, hands over my head. "Good, okay," I repeated frantically. "This is real. You're real. You better believe it. You pathetic excuse for a wife," he growled. "Terry," I started, but he held up a hand to silence me. "Shut up, witch. This is on your conscience. What do you think?" he asked, turning his head to show the exit. "Wow, not much different than that 2000 piece of crap painting you insisted on. I thought you liked that painting." I objected weakly. "I hated it, but it made you happy. I figured you'd get sick of it, just like you got bored with me. Was being with Luke worth it?" I looked down and embarrassed, but silent. The truth was it had been the best fun I'd had in a long time. "Your thoughts are clear here, Emily," Terry glowed. I tried to look away, but he was everywhere. "I read your note," I stammered, changing the subject. "Why didn't you tell me all this on Thursday?" "Would it have mattered?" he asked grudgingly. "I guess not, we'll never know." Now I spat back, hating to be defensive. "I think we both know the answer." Terry snorted. "What did you do with our money?" I asked, trying to change the subject again. My anger began to rise. "Bills still need to be paid. You're smart. You'll figure it out," Terry replied dismissively. "I know you gave it to children's charities." Why? I asked, anger building. "You denied me children. So I wanted other kids to benefit. At least the money went to good use," Terry explained. "But what about me? You know how I feel about having kids," I protested. "Yes, you made it clear. You didn't want to be burdened with a career and a baby. You got your way, just like with Luke. How's that working out?" Terry retorted. "I'm still alive. I didn't choose the coward's way." I hissed. His eyes flashed red. "Cowardly way out? You think it was easy to blow my head off watching you leave, for Luke was the hardest thing. I told you it was just one weekend. I told you I loved. You knew I'd come back. I said desperately. You patted me on the head like a dog. You thought I'd be your willing betrayed man. I don't remember that, but I'm sure I meant love. I protested. Terry chuckled darkly. You expect me to believe that? After that weekend, do you think I'd want to touch you again, knowing what you did? I'd rather die than be your betrayed man. How do you know that? I asked. Your thoughts are transparent here. Look, he said, pointing. A swirling mist appeared, turning into a large disk. An image of Luke and me appeared. I realized in horror what Terry had seen. I cried out in fear and tried to deny it, but I knew it was true. The next revelation was worse. I was the star of this show. That didn't happen. I protested. No, but you and Awai talked about it. Terry said you might as well have done it. What excuse were you going to give me that it was a one-time thing? I looked at Terry shocked. How could he know? Yes, Luke and I discussed it, but we hadn't made plans, but none of that happened. I insisted. It doesn't matter here. Thinking and talking about it is the same as doing it. Terry replied, and what is this place? Heaven. I asked sarcastically. No, it's a meeting place between your reality and mine. Terry explained. A red light began to shine through the fog. What was that? I asked. Our time is up. I have to go back. Terry said we'll talk again. Wait, why did you leave 24 in the account? I pleaded. You're smart, figure it out. Terry hissed. See ya. He added, turning away. I woke up drenched in sweat. It was 8:30 in the morning. I had fallen asleep but felt like I'd run a marathon exhausted. I went to the bathroom, then looked in the mirror. Dark bags under my eyes made me look 10 years older. I remembered Terry saying I looked 10 years younger inside. I had a full day ahead, so I showered, dressed, and went downstairs for breakfast and coffee. I picked up the morning paper, curious about any reports on Terry's self-destruction. There was a small notice about Terry shooting himself, but my name wasn't mentioned, which was a relief. I finished breakfast and walked to my car. My phone rang. It was Awai. Hey, Awai, how did go? I asked about as expected. Awai replied, I'm on administrative leave. While they investigate. Things don't look good. When will you know? I inquired. Within 2 weeks, but I'm not waiting around. How are you holding up? Awai asked. I'll be fine. I said, not mentioning my nightmare. Then I asked, does anyone else in the office know anyone with an internal email? Awai said, looks like your husband told everyone crap. I sighed. Do you want to meet for lunch? I have a lot to do today. Besides, it wouldn't be wise under the circumstances. Awai replied. You're right. Call me if you need anything. Awai said. We ended the call. I checked my messages. Jack had left the house at 5:30 a.m. I also had a message from my sister, Laura. I saw the paper. Is that your Terry who eliminated himself? Laura texted. Yes, I texted back. I'll call later. Laura was 2 years older and often played mother hen. I wasn't in the mood to fight with her. I drove to the house and parked in the garage. Inside, the smell of Terry's blood was gone, replaced by the strong odor of cleaning products. I avoided taking deep breaths to keep my lungs from drying out. Walking to the front room, I was surprised to see the couch looked almost new, though it would save me from replacing the $6,000 couch. I swore I'd never sit on it again. Briefly, I was angry at Terry for not choosing his chair. I noticed the painting above the couch was also saved thanks to Jack. Satisfied with Jack's work, I went upstairs to our home office. I gathered the folders with Terry's bank information, our wills and the mortgage insurance policy, putting them in my briefcase. The house felt eerily quiet, without Terry. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking, and for a moment I thought I smelled something rotten. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook off the anxiety and continued my tasks. I realized I needed to notify Terry's work about his self-destruction. The answering machine had several messages from his job, wondering about his absence. I called back and spoke to Allison Jones, his supervisor. Emily, is everything okay? We've called several times. Is Terry all right? Allison asked anxiously. No, Allison, he's dead. I replied as calmly as I could. Dead? Oh my God, what happened? Did he have a heart attack? No, he shot himself, I said, marveling at my calmness. Oh no, Allison, sigh, when did it happen? Friday night. I was away over the weekend, I said, hoping to avoid more questions. I'm very sorry, Emily, let us know about the wake. Everyone here will want to attend. Allison said I'll have HR contact you about insurance and his 41k call if you need anything. Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it. I said we ended the conversation, and I felt relieved it had gone better than expected. Terry's company insured employees for 2.5 times their salary, which could amount to $25,000. I hoped there wasn't a self-destruction clause, and I knew his 401k would be useful. I hung up and noticed the house's eerie quietness. We had lived here for over 20 years, mostly good years now. The house felt like a grave. Memories of Terry were everywhere, though thankfully not his ghost. I felt a chill and thought someone was watching me, but I assured myself I was alone. I opened the windows to clear the chemical smell and left the house, quickly heading to the bank. At the bank, I asked the teller for Terry's account balance. We had access to each other's accounts for emergencies. The teller frowned at his computer and then went to get Arnold Johnson, the bank manager, who invited me to his office. Mrs. Baker, glad you came in. I was planning to call you later. Arnold said. Oh, why? I asked, feeling curious and concerned. Our system flagged many transactions over the weekend from 2 of your accounts. I wanted to make sure you were aware. Arnold said. I know my husband made several charitable donations on Friday without consulting me. I hoped they could be stopped and cancelled before they went public. I also wanted to check the activity on his account. Arnold raised his eyebrows and looked at the monitor before replying. I'm afraid that's not possible. Mrs. Baker, the donations were processed right before the deadline on Friday, so most of them have already gone through. I need that money, I pleaded. Is there any way to get it back? You could contact them and explain the situation. They might return the money, but there's no guarantee. Arnold said apologetically. I can give you a printout of all the recipients. It's a long list. A simple appeal likely wouldn't work, and suing all those charities would cost more in legal fees and damage my reputation further. I could imagine the headlines: greedy lawyer sue charities. If nothing else, you'll have a big tax deduction, Arnold said, trying to lighten the mood. I stared at him, puzzled by his attempt at humor. After a few awkward moments, he cleared his throat and looked away. What about Terry's account? I asked, changing the subject. Arnold checked his computer inside. He has enough to keep the account open. There was a lot of activity on Friday. He paid off and cancelled his credit card and made a large payment to the West Side Funeral Home in Crematory. That hit me hard. Terry had planned his self-destruction carefully. What about our other accounts? I asked. He didn't touch them. Your joint savings and certificates of deposit are still intact, Arnold said. Good, I replied, relieved. I also need to apply for insurance on our mortgage. I handed him the papers. Everything seems in order, Arnold said, pulling out a form. Fill this out and return it with a copy of the pass-away certificate. The sooner the better. I'll notify the home loan office. Thank you, Arnold, I said, tucking the form into my briefcase. My pleasure, Mrs. Baker, my condolences. If you need anything else, please call. Arnold said as we shook hands. Despite his professionalism, I felt judged. I thanked him and left the bank feeling slightly better. I stopped at the store for a snack and then went to the West Side funeral home. A thin young man in a white shirt and tie greeted me. "Welcome to West Side Funeral Home. I'm Alan Markham. How can I help?" "I'm here about my husband, Terry Baker." I said, "Baker, that name is familiar. Please come into my office." Alan said he offered me coffee and sat at his computer. "Yes, I see him here. I tried to call him today. Hugh's dead," I said quietly. "I understand." Alan sighed. "Did this happen Friday?" I replied, giving minimal details. "He ordered and paid for a basic cremation service on Friday. It's unusual for clients to pay so soon before needing our services." "Was he terminally ill?" "No," I replied. Alan looked at the screen. "Then we need to make final arrangements. Do you have his pass-away certificate?" "No, not yet. His body was taken to the morgue Sunday night. I'll get the certificate once the coroner is done. When they release his body and you get the certificate, let me know and we'll proceed." "Mrs. Baker." Alan said. We spent the next hour discussing the arrangements. Terry wasn't a regular churchgoer, but he was raised Methodist or Lutheran. I decided on a simple cremation without a memorial service. Alan asked if I wanted to keep Terry's remains, but the thought made me shiver. "No problem, Mr. Baker paid for his remains to be buried in the columbarium. Unless you want to take them." Alan said. I left the funeral home feeling depressed and needed to talk to someone. I called my sister, Laura, who worked part-time at the county library. "Hey, sis," Laura answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I've been busy," I said. I didn't realize there would be so many details. "Can I stop by? I really need to talk." "Of course," Laura said in her motherly voice. "Richard is still at the hospital and won't be home until late. So we have time." "Thanks, sis. I'll be there in a few minutes." We hung up and I drove to her house. We always got along well and I knew I could tell her anything. She greeted me cheerfully at the door. "Would you like to talk over a cup of tea?" she asked kindly. "Sure," I replied. Laura went to the kitchen and I sat at the dining table fidgeting. She returned with 2 cups of hot tea after adding sugar. I began to tell her about my weekend with Hawaii. Laura listened quietly, her face neutral as I recounted everything, except for my plan to have Hawaii entertain me in front of Terry in the nightmare. "And here I thought you were smarter than me," Laura said quietly when I finished. "You became a big-time lawyer, married a man who supported you. Was your weekend worth it?" Her tone was flat, almost like a slap in the face. "It was supposed to be a short break." I objected. I told Terry it didn't mean anything. It was just sex, something I needed before I got too old. Just one weekend. He chose the coward's way. I snorted and stared into my cup, realizing I had lied to her. I had planned for more weekends, but Terry didn't know that and she didn't need to either. "The sex, huh? And you expected him to welcome you back like nothing happened? Come on, sis, you can't be that naive," Laura said, still in her motherly tone. I felt indignant. I was a beautiful woman and I wanted confirmation that I was justified. I glanced at her and saw uneasiness in her eyes, as if she could read my mind. Then her tone sharpened. "If Terry came home and said he was going away with a woman for the weekend, would you welcome him back with open arms?" I hadn't expected that from my sister. Terry would never cheat on me. He wasn't that kind of person, and if he did, I'd destroy him in the divorce. I replied reflexively. Even as I spoke, I realized how it sounded. I had just admitted to being the kind of person who would do that. Laura didn't blink, knowing me too well to be surprised. "I see, so you can play around, but he couldn't?" Laura asked in her motherly tone. "Of course not," I protested, feeling unsteady. He had no reason to need more variety when he had me. I was the one who needed it, deserved it. Realizing I had said too much, I quickly added, besides, it was only once. Or would you have gone further? Made Terry watch or brought home other men? Laura asked. Her calm, traditional demeanor made it all the more disorienting. What do you think? I don't know about these things, because I work part-time at the library. Did you do anything like that with Richard? I asked. Shocked, of course not. I love and respect Richard too much, but I know others who have, it was clear. She thought I no longer respected Terry, and what did their husbands do? Most divorced their wives. Some went further, exposing their wives to family and friends, emptying accounts. You still haven't answered. My question was having fun with Rayworth jeopardizing 24 years of marriage. It suddenly hit me. The 24 Terry left in our joint account represented one for each year of our marriage. Laura noticed my change in expression. What's the matter, she asked. Terry donated all but 24 from our joint account to children's charities. I mumbled. Really? Laura giggled. That's not funny. That account had 6 months' worth of bills. I exclaimed, but you have to give him credit for style. Laura said, chuckling. What does that mean? I asked, growing angrier. You denied him children. So he gave your money to children's charities, knowing you didn't want kids. I just never wanted them. I objected sharply. Emily, I've seen how you act around our kids. It's obvious you don't like children. I just didn't want any of my own. It's my body. I continued smugly, and Terry respected that, but I'm sure you told him that after the wedding, she sighed. I wish you'd respected him as much. I respected and loved him. I protested, but it sounded weak. Really, I'd hate to see what you'd do if you didn't love him and you're so stoic about his self-destruction that hit a nerve. What was I supposed to do? I'm left alone with responsibilities. I have to move on. If I break, it won't change anything. No, but it might help you deal with his pass away. You didn't even cry when Dad died. A long pause followed. Laura looked me in the eye. You're either holding it all in and are a potential time bomb, a functional psychopath, or deeply numb. Sooner or later it will come out. Emotions have never been my strong suit. I replied softly, pushing away the discomfort. Yeah, I know. So what now? Asked Laura. I have no choice but to move on. I said bitterly. No, you don't, but Richard and I will be here for you. We may not approve of your choices, but your family. Thank you, Laura, I appreciate it. I said, feeling grateful. We spent the next hour making small talk, which helped ease my anxiety. Richard's. On his way home, Laura said, glancing at a text message, would you like to stay for dinner? It'll just be leftovers. Your leftovers are always good. I said I'd love to stay. We had a nice dinner, avoiding the elephant in the room, which was fine by me. Richard was less talkative but showed some mild empathy when he entered. He nodded at me and exchanged quick subtle gestures. With Laura, deep married communication. I looked away, wondering when Terry and I had lost that connection. Dinner was lasagna and Laura, used to cooking, for a large family, made more than enough. She also served her homemade apple pie, which I always loved, so I accepted a generous slice. We ended with a small glass of wine and light conversation. Realizing it was time to go, I thanked Laura and headed for the door. Laura stopped me, putting her arm around my shoulders. We really love you, Emily, she whispered, hugging me tightly. Thank you, I whispered back, surprised. I love you too. If you need anything, just call, Richard added quietly. Thanks, I told him. We said our goodbyes and I drove back to the hotel in my room. I turned on the TV for background noise, changed into my nightgown and lay down. My eyes were on the TV, but my mind replayed my conversation with Laura. Was I really as indifferent and selfish as she suggested? Yes, I heard Terry answer, startling me. He was leaning against the wall looking down at me. Why are you here? I asked, perplexed. You fell asleep. He chuckled. Are you going to haunt me in every dream? I asked, feeling a cold pit in my stomach. That's the plan. He replied with a crooked smile, his exposed skull making it eerie. So you really think I'm an uncaring, emotionless, selfish witch? I asked boldly. Yes, Terry replied, unembarrassed. Your actions show it. Look. He nodded toward the TV to my surprise. It displayed scenes from my life. Tears welled up as I watched our wedding, seeing us young, vibrant and full of love. As the movie continued, I saw the changes in me. Terry was always supportive, working hard so I could finish school. We saved money, often eating cheap meals, but we were happy. After graduation I got a job and things changed. We bought a house and lived frugally until my career took off. I started to see kids as a hindrance. I watched as I ignored Terry's efforts, brushed aside his concerns and dismissed his dreams. I never wanted to get pregnant, but I kept it from Terry, using my career as an excuse. You should have been honest from the beginning that you didn't want kids. Terry said emotionlessly, giving me goosebumps. You knew I wanted kids. He growled as we watched the movie. I'm sorry. I stammered as our married life unfolded. I saw a wall grow between us, brick by brick. Terry always supported me, putting my desires first. On the other hand, lost respect for him when I earned more than he did. It didn't matter that we lived better on both salaries. I saw everything as mine. I was clearly the dominant one in our marriage. Terry resented it but silently submitted, committed to our marriage on our 12th anniversary. He realized he could live decently on his own, but didn't want to admit defeat by divorcing. I meanwhile enjoyed my dominance, which led me to pursue RY by the time the affair started. I had no respect left for Terry. Yes, that's right. Terry grumbled. I realized it was a belated response to my apology. Where was this Terry when I needed him? Maybe if he'd been rude before I left last Friday, I wouldn't have done what I did. Had it really been only 3 days? It felt much longer. The alarm clock started beeping. I rolled over and turned it off, looking at the wall where Terry had been, but he was gone. Was it just a dream? Was Terry right? Would he haunt me forever? I got out of bed, showered and brushed my teeth. The old woman in the mirror didn't look like me. I looked and felt terrible. Despite spending the night in bed, I felt drained. I packed, had breakfast and checked out. The house smelled better than yesterday, but still felt like a crypt. The bedroom was like a refrigerator, and passing the couch felt like walking past an open freezer. The thought of sitting on it made me shudder. I didn't know what Terry would do next. Would he only haunt my dreams? I paced around inventorying Terry's things. Then I realized I needed to talk to Jerry Smith, a certified estate planner at our firm. He'd probably be upset. I informed the bank about Terry's passway, but I wasn't too concerned. I wondered when you'd call. He said, answering the phone. I kept my tone businesslike, explaining what I had done, and he assured me everything would be handled. It was a perk of working at a law firm and would relieve a huge burden. Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it. I said, trying to sound sincere, despite looking exhausted. No problem, it's what I get paid for. Can you gather all your financial documents and bring them to me this afternoon? Jerry asked. Yes, I'll be there at 3:00. I replied, works for me, said Jerry. I spent the morning gathering what I needed, including a copy of Terry's will. It felt eerie, as occasional cold gusts blew despite closed doors and windows. I heard creaks like someone walking upstairs, but I chalked it up to nerves and kept packing. A hot shower calmed me and I changed into something less casual than jeans, but more casual than my usual business suits. At the office, everyone looked at me cheerfully, then quickly looked away. It was obvious they knew about my weekend with Luke. My cheeks flooded as I hurried on, going casual these days. Emily, Jonathan asked behind me. I turned to see him smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I came to see Jerry about Terry's arrangements. I said defensively, it's the most sensible thing you've done since Friday. He replied evenly, when you're done, come to my office for a few minutes. Sure, I said, nervous about my career. Jonathan. The managing partner was an old-fashioned gentleman, but I recognized an order when I heard one. I finally reached Jerry's office. He waved me in with a forced smile, offered coffee, and I handed him my papers. We discussed everything while he reviewed them. Everything seems in order. Jerry said, I'll take care of it. Anything else I need to amend my will and trust? I said, that makes sense. He replied, pulling out my folder. Your husband is listed as a beneficiary, executive, and medical power of attorney. I'd like my sister, Laura Hopkins, to replace him. I said, and give her power of attorney just in case. Very well, just write it in pencil and initial it. I'll make the changes in a day or so. Thanks, Jerry. I said, ending our meeting. I walked to Jonathan's office, noting the secretary's caustic look as if I were a nuisance. Emily, come in, have a seat. Jonathan said with a pleasant smile. How are you holding up? It's been a challenge. I replied cautiously. It sounds like you didn't sleep well. Jonathan remarked with concern. It wasn't easy. I admitted, hesitating to tell him about my dreams. Jonathan nodded and continued. You're probably wondering why I asked to meet. Jonathan began. The senior partners aren't happy. Your husband sent emails to everyone in the firm, and it's likely this information has leaked outside. Your personal and professional credibility has taken a hit. The only reason you haven't been fired is your exemplary 20-year record. Here. I pondered his words and what he didn't say. His look made me make a decision. I hoped I wouldn't regret. Maybe I should tender my resignation, I said quietly, feeling knots in my stomach. Jonathan pretended to consider it before nodding. As much as I'd like to keep you, Emily, I think it's for the best, given your service and record. The partners will agree to keep you on the payroll until the end of the month. This will give you time to handle your husband's matters. We'll also put together a reasonable severance package. You're smart and driven. You'll get back on your feet. Thank you, Mr. Bleedo, I said quietly. It felt surreal. Sure, you might want to consider a change of scenery. Have you ever been to Boise? He asked. In Idaho. No, why? I replied, puzzled. A high school buddy of mine is managing a firm there and needs someone with your experience. I can give him your name. He offered. Sure. I replied hesitantly. Great, I'll let him know. Here's his card. Jonathan said, handing me the card. I glanced at it and put it in my purse. Can I ask about why? What's going to happen to him? I questioned. Jonathan looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. I can't go into details, but let's just say Mr. Carter has exhausted any goodwill. You're not the first associate whose marriage is ruined. That's why he was transferred here after his divorce. His ex-wife caught him with a par illegal. The lawsuit required us to keep him employed and pay generous alimony. I didn't know that, I said quietly, stunned. I knew his reputation, which is why I chose him for my affair, but not all this. Well, I have a meeting. I'm sorry for your loss, Emily, and I'm sure I'll see you again before you leave. Jonathan said, standing up to signal the meeting's end. I'll be back. I still have some papers to sign. Thank you for everything, I added, shaking his hand, fighting back tears. I hurried out of the office, avoiding others who were probably watching. Once in my car, I burst into tears. I loved this job and the people I worked with, and I had been here for over 2 decades. The thought of moving to Boise felt like exile. Eventually I calmed down enough to drive, though it was difficult, with blurred vision from crying. I almost got into a few accidents. I finally made it home and sat on the couch, burying my face in my hands and sobbing uncontrollably over the loss of my job. I cried until I heard a sharp knock in the living room. Surprised, I saw a framed wedding photo lying face down on the nightstand with shattered glass. Goosebumps ran through me as I realized I was crying more over my job than Terry. Frightened, I threw the photo on the couch and looked around to see if anything else had moved. I couldn't explain how the picture had fallen so forcefully, then it hit me. It had to be Terry. I went from frightened to angry, from horror to rage. Leave me alone, I screamed into the empty room. You're dead. Go away, stop messing with me. Damn it. Suddenly the temperature dropped and the room darkened. I almost expected to see objects flying off the walls and thought I heard maniacal laughter from the stairs. There was no way I could stay in the house alone. I grabbed my phone and called Laura in a panic. Hey, sis, what's up? She answered cheerfully. Not great, can I spend the night with you guys, please? I pleaded, my voice, shaking. Her tone instantly turned concerned. Of course, we'll get the guest room ready. Is everything okay? She asked. No, it's not. I'll explain when I get there. Thank you, I said. I ran upstairs to pack my overnight bag, throwing things in hastily. I had to leave before Terry did something else. I held the banister tightly as I went downstairs. Sure, Terry would push me if I wasn't careful. I rushed to the garage, threw my stuff in the car and drove away, leaving skid marks on the pavement. Laura met me at the door and I collapsed into her arms sobbing. She comforted me and got me to sit on the couch and calm down enough to speak. Good God, sis. What happened? Did someone break in? She asked, alarmed. It's much worse. It's Terry. I replied, Terry is dead. What can he do? Laura asked, looking at me strangely. I told her about the past 2 nights and what happened at the house. She listened silently as I babbled, Hune trying to drive me crazy. I know he is. I sobbed. Honey, you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you just need to relax and get a good night's sleep. Laura suggested. No, you don't understand his self-destruction note said he hoped I'd see his face every time I closed my eyes, and I have. I haven't slept properly since Sunday and I quit my job to avoid getting fired. I sobbed again. Oh no, what about the house and bills? She asked, concerned. I have the money and insurance will cover the mortgage. I'm working until the end of the month and I've been promised severance pay, but I can't stay in that place. Ter hates me. He'll liquidate me if I stay. I explained, voice shaking. Come on, sis, that's extreme. How can a dead person hurt you? Laura asked, trying to reason with me, but you weren't there. I protested. No, I wasn't. Let me take your things upstairs. Then I'll make you some tea and a grilled cheese sandwich. That should help you calm down and then we can talk. Okay, Laura offered. Okay, I said, feeling like a scared schoolgirl. Laura carried my things upstairs and made tea and grilled cheese sandwiches. She brought them on a tray to the front room and sat with me. The tea flavored with honey and the sandwich brought back childhood memories and helped me relax, feeling better. Laura asked soothingly, yes, much, I replied with a sigh. Thank you, you're welcome. Have you told anyone else about seeing Terry? She inquired. No, are you kidding? I'd be institutionalized. I said, half joking. Not necessarily. You've been through a lot. Seeing Terry must have been a shock. Maybe you should take a few days off. I can talk to Richard about letting you stay at the lake house a few days in the country. Might do you good. Laura suggested. You may be right. Jonathan also suggested I get away. He mentioned Boise. What's in Boise? Laura asked, surprised and amused. A friend of his manages a law firm there and needs a good lawyer. I replied, are you going to call him? Laura asked, I suppose I should, but I'd hate to leave here. You and Richard are my only family right now. I took another sip of tea. By the way, I changed my will and trust. You're now my sole beneficiary and executive. I've also given you power of attorney. I hope you don't mind. No, of course not, Laura said, but you're young, you'd be around for a long time. I hope so still. I like to be prepared. I replied. We ate and drank in silence for a couple of minutes. I really messed up, didn't I? Whispered. You haven't been helping your case lately, Laura admitted diplomatically. I guess I wanted to have my cake and eat it too, I said wryly, and look what it cost you, Laura said quietly. I already knew what my actions had cost me, my husband of 24 years, my career and my peace of mind, all because I wanted to fling with Luke Carter. Yeah, I sighed, but it's too late to cry over spilled milk. Like Mum used to say, you need to pull yourself together. Sis, you're right. Maybe I'll take you up on your offer and get my mind right again. Right now I just need sleep. I yawned deeply. The tea had done its job and I felt my eyelids getting heavy. Letton, get you upstairs, Laura said. She helped me up and led me to the guest room. I barely managed to slip into my nightgown before collapsing under the covers. Thank you, I mumbled, for everything. You're welcome, now get some sleep, Laura said, kissing my forehead. She closed the door as she left and I dozed off. So you thought you could get away from me by running to your sister's house? Terry's sarcastic voice woke me. The room was filled with a thick grey mist and Terry stepped out of the closet, skull fragments on him. Why are you here? Why can't you leave me alone? I asked desperately. Leave you alone? Huh, I'll never leave you alone. Which Terry growled, his disfigured face twisted in anger. You were the one in the house, weren't you? I asked. Yes, it took effort, but now I know I can do it. Terry grinned. Please, can't you just leave me alone? You're dead. You have to move on. I pleaded. Yes, I'm dead, but whose fault is that you pulled the trigger? He retorted. Yeah, I pulled the trigger. It was either me or your boyfriend. Terry snapped back. You were going to destroy Luke. I said I thought about it seriously, but it would have been too quick. It wasn't supposed to be like that, he said, his eyes flashing crimson. How was it supposed to be? He shouted. To go along with your affairs. Leave divorce papers behind and let your law firm ruin me publicly, or maybe burn the house down and spend years in prison. I had no options left, so I chose the only one that gave me some self-respect and revenge. I pulled the trigger because it was my only choice. Now my blood is on your hands. Look, I saw my hands covered in dark red blood dripping onto Laura's bedspread. You may not see it in daylight, but it's still there and nothing can remove it. Terry added. He staggered back, more pieces of his shattered head, falling but disappearing before hitting the floor in a whisper. He added, I have unfinished business. I can't move on until it's completed. By the way, was your fling with Luke worth it? You lost me and your job. Terry continued. I know how much that job meant to you. Look, Terry, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done it. Please go away. I protested weakly. I don't think you get it, Terry replied, his tone softening. You shouldn't have thought about it at all, but you still think it's all about you, and as for leaving you alone, that's not going to happen ever. Please, Terry, I'm begging you. I can't take it anymore. I cried, tears streaming down my face. You know the saying, in one hand is desire, in the other is crap. Let's see which fills up first. I wanted a faithful wife who loved me as much as I loved her. How did that turn out? Enjoy the rest of your pathetic life, which Terry muttered, then burst into laughter. He disappeared into the closet and the fog drifted away. The blood on my hands in Laura's bedspread vanished. I collapsed onto the pillow crying. The next moment I saw sunlight through the window. I smelled bacon from downstairs and checked the bedspread, no trace of blood. I did my morning routine, got dressed and went downstairs. I didn't feel much better, but at least not worse. "Good morning," Richard said cheerfully with his morning coffee. "Laura is almost done with breakfast. Have some coffee and sit down." "Thanks, I guess I will." I said. I greeted Laura, who was putting bacon on a plate, grabbed my coffee and sat down. "How did you sleep?" Richard asked, worriedly eyeing my haggard face. "Not well," I admitted. "Did you see him again?" Laura asked, placing bacon and scrambled eggs on the table. I glanced at her, then at Richard, who looked concerned but not shocked. I realized Laura had shared my secrets with him, but I accepted it. They were a real couple. "Yeah," I replied. "Am I going crazy?" I asked Richard. "I'm a surgeon, not a psychiatrist." He replied with a slight smile, "But from what Laura told me, you're under a lot of psychological trauma and stress from Terry and your work." "You're probably right," I said, not wanting to list my woes, "but you might want to talk to our staff psychiatrist at the hospital. She's very good and might help you." "I might agree," I said. We ate scrambled eggs and bacon. Laura was the best cook since our mother, and her eggs were delicious. "We also talked about you spending some time at the lake house. We don't mind if you stay there for a few days to calm down." Richard said that would be nice. I said I knew the medical examiner wouldn't release Terry's body until the end of the week, and I had 3 weeks before I was officially dismissed. Maybe a few days at the lake would help. "Good, I'll give you the key before I leave." "Can you handle driving?" Richard asked. "I can handle it," I replied with a smile. We finished breakfast and I helped Laura clear the table. Richard handed me the cabin key from his pocket. I'd been there many times and knew the way. "Have a nice vacation." Richard said thank you both for everything, I said, hugging them. "My pleasure." Laura said call if you need anything. I packed up and left, deciding against going home for more things after yesterday. I didn't want to be there again. I stopped at Walmart for supplies and hit the road. Driving down a 2-lane road with the windows down and the radio on. I felt the wind fluttering my hair. I anticipated a few days of peace. I was half an hour from the lake when it happened. "Nice day for a drive, isn't it?" I heard from the passenger seat, stunned. I saw Terry sitting there looking out the window with sunlight shining through the exit wound in his head. "What are you doing here?" I almost shouted. "You fell asleep at the wheel, not very safe." Terry said watch the road before the intersection. My world shattered as a huge 18-wheeler slammed into my door. The impact sent the car spinning and I was hit again by another truck. My car ended up in a ditch upside down. Airbags deployed. "I'll see you later," Terry said before I passed out 25 years later. "Hello, Mrs. Hopkins," the cheerful receptionist said, as Laura signed in hello. "Amy." Laura replied. "How is Miss Baker today?" She asked April Callahan, the head nurse. "It's the same. She just sits in her wheelchair watching TV or looking out the window. Nights are hardest for her. She insists she sees her dead husband in her dreams," April said. Sadly, Laura knew this, but also knew Emily had come to terms with it. Terry's nightly visits no longer horrified her as much as they used to. "It's true. Something strange happened the other day," April said as they walked to Emily's room. "What exactly?" asked Laura. "If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe it," April began. "You know the picture of her and her husband on the dresser?" "Yes, it was taken on their wedding day," Laura said with nostalgic sadness. "I was in her room feeding her lunch when the picture suddenly fell forward and broke the glass." April said. "I almost jumped out of my skin." "Maybe there was a draft," Laura suggested, feeling a chill. "No, all the windows were closed and no fans were running," April replied. "That's odd." Laura said she remembered Emily saying the same thing happened at her house the day before the accident. Emily had slipped into a coma and recovered but was left a quadriplegic. She often complained about things moving in her room, but I thought it was the staff while cleaning. The strangest thing was Emily's reaction. April continued. Oh? Asked Laura. She just smiled and said HEK, still mad at me. Does that make sense to you? Asked April. Oddly enough it does. Laura replied with a sad smile. I'll tell you about it someday. I look forward to it. April said I have to make my rounds, but the front desk wants to talk to you about her benefits before you leave. I'll talk to you later. Laura said she reached her sister's room and saw the frail 71-year-old woman in her wheelchair staring out the window. She remembered the accident as if it were yesterday. Emily was on her way to the lake house when she was hit by an 18-wheeler. Then another truck. Emily had apparently fallen asleep at the wheel and ran a red light. Officers said Emily had to be extracted using the jaws of life and narrowly avoided drowning as water filled the cab. Laura and Richard blamed themselves for not driving her to the cabin. The police report cleared the trucking company of fault. Emily's law firm's health plan covered her hospital expenses, but not all long-term care costs. Laura with power of attorney used Emily's funds, including her 401k and Terry's 401k and the insurance from Terry's firm. Laura also sold Emily's home using most proceeds for medical expenses now covered by Medicare. Emily still had out-of-pocket costs. Medical expenses over 25 years had nearly depleted her funds and Laura feared Emily might need to move to a less comfortable nursing home. Look what I brought you. Laura said, pulling a new Afghan from a large bag. I just finished it yesterday. It's so cute. Emily squeaked. Thank you. I thought it would keep you warm at night. Laura said with a smile. I'm sure it will. Emily said, looking out the window. Can you keep a secret? She asked. Of course. Laura replied, that weekend I spent with RY. I haven't told Terry yet, but I've realized it wasn't worth the cost. Emily said, as a tear rolled down her face. The room's temperature dropped and the hospital bed rattled quietly. Laura looked fearfully at the bed, then back at her sister. I think he already knows, dear, Laura said quietly. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.